Welcome, everyone, to AURI Connect's Fields of Innovation, part of AURI Connect's monthly event series featuring updates on the work that AURI is doing to foster long-term economic benefit for Minnesota through value-added agricultural products and processes. I'm Dan Scogan, AURI's Director of Industry and Government Relations, and your host for Fields of Innovation. The AURI Connects program is hosted by the Agricultural Utilization Research Institute in Minnesota. Fields of Innovation, with sponsorship from Bremer Bank, is focused on bringing together Minnesota's regional ag and food value chains to build capacity and successfully commercialize new crops and successfully accelerate the commercialization of new crop and livestock opportunities, including new traits for existing crops. Events focus on connecting innovation and market development with value chain partners. Fields of Innovation aims to build a strong ecosystem in Minnesota and border states that will provide ag producers and value chain partners with new market opportunities. Remember, this event is being recorded and archived and can be found at auri.org. Also remember, participants are muted, but you can ask questions through the Q&A portal on your screen. Today, we will conclude our three-part winter series, where we've highlighted some of the climate-smart commodity projects taking shape in the upper Midwest, and how to utilize life cycle assessments to make informed business decisions that reduce emissions. Today, we will explore the realities of incorporating climate-smart practices in the cash crop and dairy arenas. We're glad that you've joined us today to learn how agricultural value chain participants can lower their carbon intensity scores from production to processing through the practical learnings of our guests today. So please welcome our industry partners who will outline their business innovations aimed at reducing emissions and/or capturing related market incentives. Our first panelist will be Dr. Erin Cordes. Dr. Cordes joined the Department of Bioproducts and Biosystem Engineering at the University of Minnesota in 2017. Her position as Associate Professor and Extension Engineer is to provide engineering expertise in the area of sustainable animal agricultural systems. Erin was born and raised in Saskatchewan, Canada. Dr. Cordes also has 8 years of experience in a similar research and extension role at South Dakota State University. Her past and ongoing projects include measuring the air quality impacts of different manure management practices in swine, poultry, dairy, and beef cattle barns, and the impacts of providing additional microenvironment control for grow-finished pigs and cattle. The broad mission of Dr. Cordes' program is to work with producers and communities to understand and continually improve the quality and productivity of livestock environments. We'll also hear today from Bob Lefebvre with Nature Energy. Bob grew up on a small dairy farm with 5 siblings. He received his degree in applied economics with an emphasis in ag policy from the University of Minnesota. He also spent 10 years in various management positions at a local cooperative ag retailer, 16 years as executive director of Minnesota Milk Producers Association, and over 9 years as the vice president of agricultural affairs for Midwest Dairy, a regional dairy research and promotion organization covering 9 states. And then since 2022, Bob has served as vice president of on-farm business development with Nature Energy, a renewable natural gas company, where he is responsible for relationships with farmers supplying manure to the company's digesters throughout his professional career. Bob's roles have allowed him to assist dairy farmers with their environmental stewardship practices. Bob Penner will join us today with Bob Penner Farms and Perennial Promise Growers Cooperative. Bob started his organic farm 11 years ago after a career in the corporate world with the idea that local organic wheat flour was missing a link in the sustainable food chain. His farm's mission is to inspire human flourishing through agriculture, and he works to fulfill that mission through experimentation with production practices like no-till and cover crops, and by developing local markets for new organic products on his 89 acres of rented land in Scott and LeSueur counties in Minnesota. In addition to his own farm, he is a vice president of Perennial Promise Growers Cooperative and has started a consulting business. We'll hear from Paul Greger today, hybrid rye product manager for KWS Cereals, a University of Wisconsin graduate in soils and plant science, University of St. Mary's MBA in business management. He has worked for Northwest Grain Cooperative in northwestern Minnesota, for Monsanto, Land O'Lakes Winfield, and KWS Cereal. And we'll hear from Maciek Kazula, Research Director for the Minnesota Corn Growers Association. Dr. Kazula has an MS and a PhD in agronomy and a minor in soil science from the University of Wisconsin-Madison. He also studied for several years the effects of extended corn-based crop rotations on crop productivity, soil health, and their contribution to greenhouse gas emissions. Prior to joining the MCGA in 2020, Kazula was a postdoctoral research associate in the University of Minnesota's Department of Agronomy and Plant Genetics, where he focused on applied soybean production. As Minnesota's Corn Research Director, Kazula oversees the Corn Checkoff funded research programs and works with Minnesota corn grower leaders to direct over $2 million annually into quality research that focuses on improving productivity, water quality, soil health, and finding new uses for corn. Going to be an outstanding lineup for our webinar today, but let's get started. We'll begin with Dr. Cordes. Dr. Cordes, welcome to our Fields of Innovation.
Thank you very much for having me. It's a pleasure to be here speaking with all of you today. I want to open today's talk sharing some of my experiences on some collaborative work this past year with Midwest Dairy. As we look to ways to decarbonize the livestock and agricultural sectors, first have to start back at the farm. And so part of this project was about building capacity to have those conversations, to enter into some building capacity to have these types of conversations at a very broad level. So my focus is really on in this presentation is on my work with the dairy industry, but much of what I learned, I feel, can be applied across most of the livestock sectors. Part of having this conversation, or what I learned from having these conversations with members of the dairy industry this past year is, one of the first questions is, well, what is sustainability? Decarbonization, we recognize, is often part of some broader sustainability plans. And what does that mean? Well, rather than giving a specific definition, or my definition of what sustainability is, how I like to enter into these conversations is using a road trip analogy. And so rather than defining what it is, I try to emphasize that sustainability plans, sustainability goals, they are about long-term goals, right, for sustaining an operation. And in order to have that long-term plan, there needs to be some definition of what that long-term plan looks like, and then a plan to meet that. So that's been one of the learning points and one of the emphasis points this past year in these conversations. Not just for farms, but also for those that support farms. Many of us on this webinar today, we might not be actively the ones that engage different technologies or decarbonizations on farms, but we do support the decision makers on these farms. And so part of navigating these conversations is that ability to talk, and to talk in the same way, or at least understand how each of us is approaching sustainability decisions. From the dairy sector, or the dairy industry, the dairy industry as a whole set forth a vision a couple of years back to be an environmental solution. And to be in that environmental solution, the dairy industry made a collective agreement, or a collective commitment, I should say, that by 2050, the dairy industry will achieve greenhouse gas neutrality, optimize water use while maximizing recycling of water, and improve water quality as well. And so part of these conversations is, recognizing that this is one initiative specific to the dairy industry, but that as individual farms, there isn't necessarily a firm plan mapped out as to how to contribute to this collective agreement. The collective agreement also doesn't mean that every single farm achieves greenhouse gas neutrality or reaches each of one of these goals, but rather how can we collectively commit to moving the industry as a whole that way. So greenhouse gas neutrality fits into this topic, of decarbonization. And so the dairy industry has a vested interest in this. One of the images, or one of the effective images that I've seen this past year, this particular image was provided by US Dairy, and it's based on in a generalization of some of their life cycle assessments that have been done in the past. But this particular image I find has been eye-opening for advisors in particular to recognize that when we talk about the dairy industry, we're not just simply talking about what goes on in the barn with the cows. From a dairy farm perspective, the footprint for a farm extends to that feed production and incorporates also where the energy is coming from and the energy use. What this particular graph demonstrates is that on very broad average perspective, right? When we talk about the carbon footprint for farms or the greenhouse gas footprint, the enteric methane, the manure handling, and the feed production, each of those sectors by themselves are almost a third of the greenhouse gas footprint. And so while we often get hung up on one particular element of the farm, whether it's the manure management or the cows themselves, there is a broader picture that we can look at when we're trying to identify how can a farm or a group of farms or a region, how can different farms contribute to the net zero initiative, but also just as a farm themselves, what are some directions for movement? Now this are key areas of focus based on some generalizations about the dairy industry as a whole across the US. But I like sharing this image because I think it also emphasizes that for individual farms, we have the tools to get at, well, what are these breakdowns in these different focus areas for different farms? And what of those focus areas are really under someone's control? Perhaps the biggest learning point, not learning point, but emphasis and as part of this work this past year with the dairy industry is that these conversations when it comes to sustainability and how we navigate these sustainability conversations, that these conversations are deeply personal. On the screen, you see several frequently asked questions that have come up over this past year when we start to enter into sustainability conversations or greenhouse gas conversations or decarbonization conversations. You know, there's a question, particularly in the dairy industry, about why is dairy under the spotlight for greenhouse gas reductions? You know, does this mean that I need to be net zero? And how do I have these conversations with those that aren't as familiar with agriculture? So these personal questions, we need to be able to navigate them as we enter into these conversations. I had this conversation with these frequently asked questions with a local dairy farmer, and so I provided the link for that video on the screen as well. It's about a 10-minute video, but we answer each of these questions. And so where do we go from here? Well, from that stand backish perspective as how can we help move these conversations? The work that I'm continuing to do this next year with Midwest Dairy is about building value in baselines. You know, how can we figure out for individual farms where we have these areas that we can make decisions or where we have some decision-making power and ultimately see if there's some ways that we can effectively change our greenhouse gas footprint or decarbonize the dairy industry. It does begin with some baseline calculations, and there are numerous tools that are generally based on some of that life cycle analysis methodology, but we have different tools available to help us give even a broad picture about what the footprint looks like for a given farm. But for that footprint to be effective, it does need some interpretation and share back with the farm, not only the farm, but those that advise the farm. And so if we do that, if we initiate more of these baselines, does that help us initiate more conversations and repetition so that we are coming back to those calculations and we keep this cycle going? But for this to be effective, not only those of us that support the industry, we do have to be able to answer that so what, now what, when we're looking at different assessments for where we stand. And so with that, I'm going to turn it over to the next speaker.
Thank you, Dr. Cordes. We'll go to Bob Lefebvre next. Bob?
All right, thanks, Dan, and thanks, Dr. Cordes. You really did an outstanding job, I would say, of laying out what nature energy can provide to not only the dairy industry, but other livestock farmers as well. Nature Energy is a Danish company that was recently purchased by Shell Oil. The actual purchase was just completed less than a month ago. And what we do at Nature Energy is we are Europe's largest natural gas maker, as we have entered the North American market here just in the last year. Our model is significantly different than other anaerobic digesters that are in the marketplace. We are truly a community digester, or what would be known as a hub and spoke digester. You start down in the bottom left-hand corner where we're collecting organic waste, manure from dairies and others. And that organic waste is brought into our digesters. And from there, after under thermophilic conditions, we obviously have the residual product that's left as a superior fertilizer product to raw manure. And so that circular system continues. Again, we're a centralized plant. We pull in manure from 20 to 30 miles out. Another unique, something that's unique from us is our business model allows dairy farmers and livestock farmers of all sizes to contribute, in particular to that 33% of that manure and nutrient management that Dr. Cordes spoke about. We offer all farmers with livestock an opportunity, not just those that are 3,000 cows or are larger, to reduce their methane emissions. We do have a very big focus on research and development, and we continue to look for ways to improve our design and handle all types of organic waste. We are commercializing a Power to X, where we are able to take, your typical digester produces about 60% methane and another 35% carbon dioxide. Through new technologies that we are commercializing, we can get over 90% methane out of our digesters. And at the back end, we're producing, in our American models, about 700,000 tons of organic waste that goes back out into the fields. Some of you may know this. I mean, there's a lot of use for renewable natural gas, or green gas, as we like to call it, or biogenic CO2. For example, if you go to Denmark and if you have a beer, the bubbles from that beer came from one of our plants. That's just one example. But it can be liquefied or compressed, as we are already doing in Denmark as well. And so there's many more uses for renewable natural gas, as well as carbon dioxide for euthanasia purposes with animals and slaughter facilities, to, like I mentioned, beer, bubbles in our beer. We are very efficient. We're large scale, unlike any other of scale in the United States today. And our system of taking that organic waste in and having it in our thermophilic digesters, which runs at about 125 to 130 degrees versus the others that are all at a mesophilic, we're returning those nutrients. Cow manure really is a good foundation for creating renewable natural gas, but it's when you co-digest it with others that you're really able to produce more gas. At the end, one of the components is we're saving application costs of those nutrients for those farmers, those suppliers of that. We're saving them on application costs as well. Bottom line is what we provide that some others do provide, but we provide much more across the board, regardless of how large or how small you are, is the ability to reduce their on-farm storage by as much as 50% because of our model. Similar to other digesters, there is more plant available nitrogen that goes back to the farmers, but because of our co-digesting model, we're providing even more than those that just use cow manure. And because of our back-end processes that we have, we can also reduce the phosphorus level in that manure versus raw manure. Yes, there's the financial incentives, there's profit share with nature energy / Shell Oil that our suppliers receive. But I also think most importantly, and this is something that Dr. Cordes also brought up, is again, and I've covered this a number of times, but it's the ability now for all dairy farmers to contribute to the dairy industry's 2050 environmental commitments in all three of those areas. One, to reduce their greenhouse gas emissions. Two, to improve water quality, both on the surface water quality because of our ability to take out some of that phosphorus in that fertilizer product that goes back to the farmer, but also in groundwater through a more efficient use of that nitrogen, so you're going to get less nitrate leaching, as well as water use optimization. From there, I will turn it over to Ben.
Hello, everyone. Thank you, Bob. And I'm Ben Penner, Vice President of the Perennial Promise Growers Cooperative. And I have a lot to cover, so I'm going to go very quickly. So hope you stay with me. I'm a Kernza grower from St. Peter, and I serve as the Vice President of the Board of the Perennial Promise Growers Cooperative, representing 35 members and approximately 1,200 acres of Kernza, a new Forever Green Initiative crop. Our Kernza acres are primarily located in Minnesota, and we need to develop new industries and entrepreneurship in Minnesota to expand the value chain for these perennial and winter annual crops and realize their environmental and economic benefits. So the purpose of our cooperative is to market, sell, and develop the infrastructure to support Kernza growers. As a farmer and entrepreneur, we are faced with the twin challenges of innovating and pushing ourselves to respond to challenges, both the everyday variety of challenges, such as getting our grain to market, and the weather and the more strategic challenges, such as how do we produce food in such a way to conserve and protect the environment that we all love and depend on profitably, and in such a way that we can continue the strong legacy of agricultural practice and leadership that we've come to depend on in the upper Midwest. This opportunity is the rare opportunity to respond to both of those challenges all at once. I've often said, how often do you get the chance to work on developing a new crop, and how often do you get the chance to work on a crop that, in my opinion, is the most direct way to address the mounting climate and environmental challenges that we face today while encouraging entrepreneurship. This is truly a once-in-a-lifetime chance, and I hope you'll join me in my enthusiasm for this. So our mission is to market, sell, and develop the markets for Kernza, and also to relay those added ecosystem benefits back to the farmer, landowner, and our communities and our state as a whole. So it's quite an ambitious goal we have, and we think we have a pathway to move towards that. I'd like to just set the stage just very briefly, though, because we've been fairly active recently with policy. And so I've returned just about a week and a half ago from Washington, D.C., as well as we have worked with our representatives here in the state of Minnesota. So last week a few weeks ago, met with Representative Craig, Representative Senator Klobuchar, as well as Senator Smith. And as I mentioned, there is just a palpable sense of need from our policymakers to have solutions that utilize agriculture that directly benefit our nation, our state, and our nation as a whole. So I think we're at a pretty unique moment in being able to bring this to the fore. As an organization, we're just starting in the last couple of years, and so there's a lot to do. We just launched a brand new website. You can go visit it, perennialpromise.com. Now, why is Kernza the answer? Well, it is the first commercially available perennial grain crop in the United States. So it, you can see a little bit here, but the roots go down about 8 feet. And so basically when you plant ferns in a field, any kind of runoff of nitrogen or phosphorus or any other sorts of runoff is halted. It will not, it'll take most of that up. And with that 8-foot root system, there is anecdotal evidence. However, there's a lot of work going on right now to quantify that as to the carbon sequestration benefits of this new crop. So, once we can kind of really nail down what those benefits are, then obviously we'll be able to bring that value back to landowners, farmers, and our communities. It's already being used in wildlife protection areas right here where I live in St. Peter, as well as Blisma's drinking water management areas around the state of Minnesota. So it's just very quickly, it is a perennial. So I planted my crop, for example, in fall of 2020, September 5, and it is still growing in the ground today. I haven't touched by tillage any of that soil since 2020. And I've harvested now 2 crops, and I'm going to harvest the 3rd here in a few months. So why isn't this wonder crop everywhere? Well, that's our job in a way, is to try to develop the markets. Right now, we're undergoing a robust price discovery analysis. And since the yield is significantly different than, for example, corn or even wheat, we're measuring in pounds of yield rather than in bushels. We have to figure out, well, what exactly will the market pay for this crop? And also, what are the supporting infrastructure needs that allow the crop to actually flow through back to the end user? So there's quite a bit, and that's not to mention the learning curves on the ground and with farmers. I've been blessed to be able to be one of those out setting the combine when there's really no Kernza setting on the machine, and trying to discover exactly how fast to run the rotor to get it out of the head. All right, so there's quite a bit of collaboration going on. The USDA funded a $10 million grant for the University of Minnesota, and I am working with, it's called the Kernza CAP, work with them on that, on the supply chains and economics team. And many other collaborators around the country are working on that as well. Right now, there are approximately 5,000 acres total. And as I mentioned, we have 1,200 in the co-op. In order to grow the crop, one must be a licensed grower with the Land Institute. Our yields have been approximately where we expected them to be, as far as the averages, sort of in that 400, 450 pound range. However, there have been yields going up to 750 or 1,000 pounds per acre. That will increase. Obviously, we have a very steep curve on R&D that's happening at the University of Minnesota right now. So in coming years, those numbers will change significantly with new varieties. There's quite a bit of interest in the popular press. Whole Foods, called it one of their top 20 foods in 2021, I believe, or 2022. Sorry, 22. So there's quite a bit of interest from a consumer level, and we need to bring that to bear. As a cooperative, we are led by farmers, and so we have a team of 6 Kernza growers, including myself, and a couple of advisors. We have 1 member in Wisconsin, or sorry, 2 members in Wisconsin, and a couple in Iowa and South Dakota. We work closely with our marketing team of Manual Agriculture, which is based in Boulder, Colorado, with offices here in Minnesota. And they're working with CPG brands to bring this vision to, as well as the U of M is a strong, and the Forever Green initiative is a strong. Okay. We think the cooperative model gives strength in terms of bringing a real mindset of collaboration amongst growers, so that we're not all competing against one another for market share as well as agronomic knowledge. I think it's a very good model. In the future, we seek to become a hub and a clearinghouse for all things Kernza related, as well as new Forever Green Initiative crops, such as winter camelina that are coming down the line, And we think that we're well positioned to provide value to the state of Minnesota and to our nation as a whole. So if you want to get involved, you can contact me or Carmen Fernholz, who's our president, if they're on the screen. Thank you.
Thank you. Next slide. KWS is probably not a real big household name in the US right now, but KWS is a very large company, fourth largest breeding company in the world. So it's a global company. But interesting fact that it's 165 years old, but it's still family owned. So it is a great company to work for, and they are doing great things. They're using quite a bit, up to 15% of their net dollars to continue with their breeding process. So they're just solely a genetic company. Next slide. These are some of the KWS products in the portfolio. Some of you probably are not aware, but we are in a lot of different crops. The one I'll be talking, of course, is about hybrid rye, but there's a vegetable business. There's corn, cereals in the US also, sunflowers and sorghum, soybeans, and sugar beets, probably the number one sugar beet company in the world, number one in US also. So just some background on KWS. Next slide. So I'm going to talk about the benefits. Next slide. A lot of people have, remember OP rye, but hybrid rye has been around since 1985, believe it or not. And this hybrid rye is, consider it your granddad's OP rye on steroids. So it has a lot of benefits that puts it into basically in the sustainable picture really well. Allelopathic effect, it suppresses weeds. It has strong disease resistance. We have built-in ergot protection, which is a difficult thing to have in rye, especially if you're feeding or in the food market. Hybrid vigor is one of the, if it's a hybrid, it has great root biomass, great top biomass. It has good standability. Again, and it carries a lot of disease resistance and other things along with it. So, and it also, that high biomass, of course, we like, and a lot of growers like because of the soil health, they can get that residue into the soil. And again, reduce pesticide. If we're looking at sustainability, we don't have very many of our growers actually using any pesticides on our hybrid rye right now because the weed control is so good because of the allelopathic effect and its biomass that it really suppresses weeds. Insect problems are generally not an issue either, but well, there could be always some armyworms or some things around that could cause some problems. Nutrient efficiency, it's very good at assimilating nutrients, deep root system, wide root system. It picks up manure and facilitates manure applications and nitrogen in the soil. So it's very good at nutrient efficiency, doesn't require as much nitrogen as any of those cereals like corn, wheat, barley, or even sometimes oats. So we also have the CO2 picture. We have data that we produce 5% less CO2 than wheat per bushel and 6.7 in corn, and that's approximately 1,200 pounds less CO2 than corn if you're out in the field. So it fits the CO2 question mark that a lot of people have in resilient crops, and it's good at that. Also very drought tolerant, and rye we know has always been drought tolerant, and hybrid rye is no exception. Much less water than wheat or corn. As you can see the picture, we're using about 20 gallons less per pound of wheat than of water. So it's very good at a drought tolerance. Next slide. Just to highlight hybrid, the vigor of why this isn't your old granddad's rye. You can look at the yields of what we're getting. This is just a Minnesota slide. This is pretty much universal across the US. We're producing or growing in probably about 20 states right now in the US. And you can see that probably 100% of the time we're out yielding the rye that are in the market, the OP rye, even spring wheats and some winter wheat. So it's a very yield intense crop, even though it doesn't require the amount of inputs that other crops need. Next slide. Just wanted to show a picture of the allelopathic effect. You can see the rye has really not much for weeds in it. As you move away, there's a little bit of weeds, and they're short and stunted. But as you move away from the rye, you can see how weeds can be affected by this hybrid rye. So it is a very good weed resistance breaker. So next slide. Just some other benefits to touch on. You know, it's great for erosion control, pretty simple because of its biomass. It's great in benefits in between. We have data for corn and soybean in the rotation. Rye is giving corn and soybean elevations in yield just by being in their rotation. We've had it in relay crops in Iowa, and it's doing quite well in that area. And also we have forages of these products, so we can use our forage products in the same way within the dairy industry. They're very user friendly for hybrid rye right now because of that less water in some of the western states and things like that. So good for that. Also, we have a lot of feeding information for cattle and hogs and even dairy, so people are starting to use those. And since it is very good productive from a productive state, is also very good to put in the rations with corn. So there we have studies that we really don't affect the feed efficiency by adding hybrid rye to corn, or replacing some of the corn with hog and dairy and beef cattle. Next slide. So hybrid rye, I put this slide up a lot, but it checks all the boxes. Whatever you want to look at from a resiliency, or all the acronyms, or all the things for carbon, sustainability, regenerative. I mean, hybrid rye checks all the boxes. It's a very good crop, and it's really good from getting into that lowering the carbon intensity in food in some of our agricultural products. So next slide. Markets, I want to touch on that. Next slide. So we have 4 main markets we're in right now. We're in the distilling market. We have probably about over 10 to 15,000 acres of hybrid rye that's being used in the distilling market. For actually whiskey is most of it what's happening. The food market is there. We have a market for straw and for feed in most animals. Not too much in the poultry side, but right now within cattle, pigs, and we also have some in some dog food consideration. So next slide. Just we talk about the food perspective, you know, we always consider rye that heavy pumpernickel rye. Well, rye is growing up within the baking and milling companies. So we look here like King Arthur or Ardent Mills, they're actually taking rye and softening a little bit, I call it. So you're seeing lower proportions of rye in the mixes, but they're giving you excellent quality and taste perspective that people are coming back. So they're not afraid to say, oh, if it says rye on the bag, it's that heavy tasting stuff I don't like. But rye is evolving even in the baking industry, and we're trying to implement practices and products there to help them. And if you look at these, King Arthur is also very prioritized in regenerative agriculture. So that's a good combination for us if we can, again, partner with them. Next slide. General Mills is also very big. They did a paper on the role of grains in sustainable diets. So again, rye is going to fit very well. If you look at this publication, that we can fit into these as a new role in some of these grains that are used for flour. Next slide. Dog food has risen again. I know there was some questions whether or not feeding all plant-based things was happening, and there were some issues with allergens and stuff. So rye has been actually brought up back into the the dog food industry because of some of the sensitivities that wheat and corn, and plus it's the other crop being sustainable. It also fits again the sustainability of the company's goals, and from that respect also. Next slide. We also are in the distilling markets. The 2 big people in there are Brooks Grain and Schooler. And if you look at Schooler, I mean, they're trying to baseline their carbon footprint through the operation. So we're trying to improve our initiatives by inviting the industry into this value chain system that rye can be a part of. So as they look at all the way through their value chain, we think hybrid rye has a good fit to fit their environmental impact statement. So next slide. In the feed business, locally, Bowerboom Ag, we've done some research with them about inclusion levels with pig and the grower finisher performance. And again, some of this is moving forward because they're interested in that and supplementing with hybrid rye, because right now going to Tyson is actually looking for raw hybrid rye or rye in their ration, because they like the iodine shift, because it lowers the iodine and it makes it has nice fat, white fat for a different inclusion in different markets. So that's another thing that again our research is showing some quality in carcass things. So next slide. Pipestone, again local, but again they're also doing work with our hybrid rye. As you see, they're doing the effect of replacing corn with hybrid rye on growth and carcass quality also. So they're finding hybrid rye has a definite fit, not only in their feed, but also in their objective from a standpoint of their carbon footprint. So you look at their objective there, they're looking at, we need to determine the optimal way to utilize this feed stuff in pig ration. So that's what we're working on with them. Next slide. Tyson Foods is basically the processor of basically like Pipestone and Bowerboom. So they're also committed to sustainability. So they're having some talks too about this sustainability issue and their environmental footprint. So we're involved, kind of a secondary involvement with that because of the feed industry. Next slide. Smithfield, we have a relationship with them, huge pig company in Utah and Colorado. They are feeding that to their sows and some of their finishing rations. And the wheat situation out there is a little bleak with water, with some insect damage. So their yields are getting poor from wheat perspective. So out there, rye is becoming a somewhat a preferred product for them now, that the growers out there can get into that value chain now with the hybrid rye, get better yields, better ROI on their farms, and not struggle so much because of the water issues out west. So next slide. I found this interesting, iFeeder, that the comment is, animal food ingredients and additives remain one of the least measured and documented sustainability components within the US food supply. And the reason I locked into that is because that's really where KWS is really trying to focus, is that we have to generate, kind of like what Ben was talking about. We're a fledgling company. We've been in the US since 2018. We have right now about 50,000 acres that's actually planted to hybrid rye. Not a lot, but it's growing, and we have to entertain more people to aggregate more of the grain so we can understand and get these food ingredients into the system. But also we're testing, we're cooperating in the research realm to understand not just the sustainability, and we know rye is very sustainable, but also the quality of rye, that we can match that as a food ingredient with sustainability will definitely help us. And I guess from that standpoint, from the CO2 emissions there. Next slide. Again, American feed industry, whoops, missed one, back one. And the American feed industry also believes in sustainability for animal feed. So we're trying to generate more stakeholders, just like Ben is on the Kernza, to promote these products, and intensify their use, and to just get more people utilizing them in a way that is sustainable. But also we have to find aggregators in order for farmers love to grow it, but it's like, where do they take it to market their products. So that's our big goal, is to find more markets and to enter those, so we have more hybrid rye available, so there's some more activity within the system. So kind of what Erin was talking about, we really encourage the conversation. I like the conversation slide she had, because it brings into the discussion farmers talking to local people, those local people talking to industry people, talking to local people that are feeding pigs or local processing plants. So it takes a whole bunch of talk. So last slide. Thank you very much. If you need to get a hold of me, that's great.
Thank you, Paul. And yeah, conversation. We want to wrap up today with some conversation. So we're going to get our last presenter in here today. Dr. Kazula, the floor is yours.
Thank you for this opportunity. It's really great pleasure to be here and provide a high-level overview of Minnesota corn research program around sustainability and decarbonization. Before we go to the specifics, I just want to highlight our research program in general. Minnesota corn growers have a very rich history of investing into quality research, which fits our mission to identify and promote opportunities for corn farmers while enhancing quality of life. On an annual basis, it translates to $2.2 million of corn checkoff investment into this research. We have a designated discovery and development team composed of grower leaders that is in charge of directing those research investments, and I am very privileged to be a staff lead of that team. This year, our research portfolio has 17 primary research projects, we call. Those are led usually by researchers, academic researchers, and are longer in duration. We have also 13 innovation grant projects, and those are led by farmers directly on their farm operations. They give them opportunity to test ideas, creations by their own, and share results with others. So our research portfolio is very diverse. And in the next couple of slides, I'll highlight only those projects that are related to the topic of our conversation today. On sustainability, becoming sustainable from both environmental and economical point of views is one of Minnesota corn growers' biggest priorities. We do it in multiple ways. We fund quite few education and outreach programs that are run by University of Minnesota extension specialists. Those are climate smart, carbon smart, and nitrogen smart programs designed to deliver best available information on those challenging topics to producers across the state to increase awareness and drive positive changes. So to be able to make any changes, we have to, everyone has to be aware of the fundamentals and where it's coming from. We also have many projects that are doing boots on the ground type of work designed to protect our precious resources, soil, water, and air. And starting from the air, I want to mention a few projects that are aiming at reducing greenhouse gas emissions from agricultural soils. We are in the second year of Dr. Griffith's work that uses climate-controlled simulations at the University of Minnesota Mesocosm facility. You can see this picture on this slide, how it looks. The project assesses whether cover crops or enhanced efficiency fertilizers can, to a certain extent, mitigate nitrous oxide emissions, especially during those freezing and thawing cycles that are happening during springtime when the crop is not growing yet. But those can really contribute to large emissions. Up to 35% cumulative emissions can happen during that time. We also have a third year of nitrogen rate study conducted by Dr. Fabian Fernandez in Lamberton Station. It is designed on individually drained plots and is looking to find an optimum nitrogen rate that maximizes both productivity, but minimizes nitrogen losses through various pathways, such as nitrous oxide emissions, so also to reduce greenhouse gas. And on our soil health and water quality side, just want to mention Dr. Melissa Wilson's work that just completed. It provides a very useful information how manure and cover crops can be integrated, which can greatly reduce erosion and nutrient losses during for manure application. And last but not least to mention is the project, we call it the soil health demonstration site in Wilkin County, run by Vance Johnson on his farm that evaluates 5-year crop rotation under various tillage systems, such as conventional, reduced or no-till, with or without cover crops integration. It is part of our innovation grant program, but is very collaborative and many partners are involved. All right, and on this slide, I also want to present a couple of our projects on developing new uses and enhancing existing uses of corn, which are also adding to sustainability story. Our biggest investment is with the Center for Sustainable Polymers at the University of Minnesota. It is in 5th year of collaboration. As the name implies, the center is focusing on developing new plant-based plastics as an alternative way to conventional fossil fuel-made plastics. And few of those discoveries that actually using corn as a main ingredient and in a very early commercialization stage. So we have some successes on this front. And also on the ethanol side, we just wrapped up our 3rd year project with Dr. Will Northrop at U of M on developing a range extender engine that is capable of utilizing higher blends of sustainable fuel ethanol. So such engine has a potential to work in the future in conjunction with vehicles, electric vehicles, to extend their range. And on the last slide, just want to bring you a few key results of our 2022 on-farm sustainability analysis report that we've done for the first time ever. This was prepared by the Sustainable Environmental Consultant Group, which is a reputable and fully independent third party, which provides science-based sustainability metrics. So all this data that has been generated is using verified and officially approved models, same as USDA and other agencies are using. This data shows aggregated information based on 409 fields that cover impressive 30,000 acres that are spread across the whole state here in Minnesota, and represents Minnesota corn's leadership farming operations. So models results include input data from various public resources that relate to conditions the crop were grown, but most importantly, full management information provided by participating producers. So on this upper pie chart that you see here, you can see that 24% of those acres had cover crop integrated. Corn and soybean were most dominant crops, but also there was 20% of land under different crops, which is pretty diverse environment. And 50% acres were using some kind of reduced tillage or no till practices. So the key numbers from this study to remember is that the soil erosion rate was at 0.67 ton per acre, which is way below the national average that is 4.6. We also saw negative net greenhouse gas emissions, meaning that soils were acting as greenhouse gas sink, which is probably due to the fact that soil carbon was sequestered at 0.16 ton per acre in this study, and about 45% of fields used nitrogen inhibitor or some kind of form of stabilizer. And one interesting metric also to know is that compared to conventional practices that use conventional tillage or no cover crop, here we see that for a little bit over 14 3,000 tons of CO2 was less emitted from this plant compared to those other practices that are conventional, which means that 3,000 cars were off the road. I think that concludes my presentation.
Thank you, Dr. Kazula. And we had hoped to have a robust Q&A at this point. It looks like we're kind of running out of time on that. I might just ask a couple of real quick questions. Dr. Cordes, if you're still on the line with us, I'm just curious, you touched on it a little bit in your presentation, but creating that baseline, I think producers who are so independent and so want a fair shake in this process, what do you see as the process for creating that baseline for growing more sustainable crops or carbon sequestration?
There are numerous tools for generating that baseline. Some are freely available online, but I think the best approach is to engage with your industry organizations. They have tools at their disposal and also help in finding that support to run those tools. They're not so super simple all the time to run, but I think, you know, as in that preparation step, many of these models for baselines, they're really reliant on good data and good records. And it's less about, you know, measuring things on farm, but it is about having some strong records to build that baseline from.
And then I want Ben and Paul just to comment real quickly on hybrid rye and Kernza. Do we need more producers? Do we have the seed stock to supply to new and more producers? And will the co-op help me get licensed? Kind of a three-part question.
Well, from a hybrid rye perspective, plenty of seed we are producing here in the US, the hybrid. So seed is not an issue for hybrid rye. We have producers that want to grow it. Our real big issue is what the growers that are not close enough to markets, what do they do with their grain? So that has been our big issue, and I'm working, that's my job. I've been trying to work on that, but that's our struggle right now, to expand the market.
How about
Thanks,
you,
Dan.
Dan?
Quickly, working to get licensed right now. And so there is seed. Yes, there is seed available. There's plenty to scale up. I think the critical need right now is to develop the supporting infrastructure and get that market pull, and then we can scale it up very quickly from there. But demand will certainly increase, but matching the two is the challenge at the moment. So.
Well, I want to thank Dr. Cordes, Bob Lefebvre, Ben Penner, Paul Greger, and Dr. Kazula for joining us and being part of our presentation on Fields of Innovation today. Remember, a recording of the entire conversation will also be made available at auri.org. I want to thank everyone, the participants and the panelists for participating today. And then we hope you'll join us April 11th for the New Uses Forum. We've been working on this for the last 6 months. It should be another great program. Time is running out to get registered, and you won't want to miss this dynamic one-day conference that's being planned in the Minneapolis area, with an option to join virtually if you'd rather. Now, our next Fields of Innovation event is going to be held in June, where we will be exploring utilization opportunities for established and emerging oilseed crops in meeting the rising demand for biofuel feedstocks and beyond. Please visit our website for more information and to get registered for upcoming AURI Connects events at auri.org. That concludes AURI Connects Fields of Innovation for today, presented by the Agricultural Utilization Research Institute of Minnesota. AURI's mission is to foster long-term economic benefit for Minnesota through value-added agricultural products and processes. And please join AURI on Fields of Innovation Facebook group for future postings of events and interesting content. Thanks for your time.